Drafting of pattern using a triangular scale. A pattern is basically a template prepared by experts for making a garment. Drafting instructions will have seam allowances and varying ease added to the body measurements required for drafting purpose. The drafting instructions describe each line and curve seen in the pattern. Before we mark the pattern on fabric, we should first familiarize the pattern and the measurements of the construction lines by practicing it on a notebook. So for scaling down the measurements, we will use a triangular scale while drafting a pattern on a notebook. At the end of the session, you will be able to calculate measurements for drafting, construct pattern using a triangular scale. Let's first familiarize with the tools and materials required for doing this exercise. They are notebook, pencil, triangular scale, measuring tape, pattern and drafting instructions, fraction table, tablet, and scale. Now let's see how to draft the pattern in notebook using a triangular scale. Here we have chosen the pattern of Janghiya as an example. From the given drafting instructions, first, let's see what are the body measurements required for making a Janghiya. We can see that only hip circumference is required for making a Janghiya. Measure the hip circumference and note it down in your notebook. Here, we have the hip circumference as 22 inches. Again, see the drafting instructions to see if any fractions of the body measurement need to be taken. You can easily identify the divisions by checking the fractions written near the body measurement symbols. In this case, you need to find 1/3 of hip circumference, 1/4 of hip circumference, and 1/12 of hip circumference. It is easy to note down these fractions in a table. Now let's find out these fractions of hip circumference, that is 1/3 of 22, 1/4 of 22, and 1/12 of 22. For that, we will use a fraction table. Here, our hip circumference is 22 inches. So find 22 in the first column of your fraction table. Now keep the scale under 22 and find the first fraction, 1/3 of 22. Here, we are getting the value as 7 3/8. Next, we will find 1/4 of 22. We are getting the value as 5.5. And 1/12 of 22 is 1/7/8. After finding all the fractions as per the drafting instructions, we will now copy all the drafting instructions in our notebook. But instead of fractions of body measurements, we will substitute the values that we have found using a fraction table. Now, we need to find the sum of these values. We've already learned how to add numbers using a measuring tape. We will use the same technique here to find the sum. The next step is to draw the pattern of Janggia in our notebook. But before that, let's watch the construction of pattern video to see how to construct the pattern lines. Now, we can construct the pattern in our notebook. We will use the triangular scale to draw the pattern in our notebook. Here, we are using a 1:4 scale to draw the pattern. As per our drafting instruction, first we will draw the line 02, which we have found out as 9 5/8 inches. As you can see in the triangular scale, there are no 1/8 markings. So while constructing the pattern, we can approximate values to the nearest fractions. Here we will approximate 9 5/8 inches to 9.5 inches. Now we can draw the line 02, which is 9.5 inches. Then we can draw the next line 01, which is 6.5 inches. Follow the drafting instructions to construct the lines. Here point 7 is the midpoint of line 5 3. So first measure the length of 5 3 using the triangular scale. We got 5 3 as 8.5 inches. Now by using the dividing measurements technique, we can find the half of 8.5. Here we have got it as 4.25 inches. Mark point 7 such that 5 7 is 4.25 inches. Similarly, we will construct the lines as per the drafting instructions. In this session, we have learned how to draft pattern using a triangular scale. Before we conclude, Let's take a look at the key steps involved in drafting a pattern using a triangular scale. Step 1. Refer to the drafting instructions to see which body measurements need to be taken. Note the measurements in your notebook. Step 2. Check the pattern instructions to see if you need to find out any fractions of the body measurements. If so, draw a table with all the fractions to be found out. Step 3. Use the fraction table to find out the fractions of the body measurements. Step 4. Copy the drafting instructions in your notebook by substituting the values found out from the fraction table instead of fractions of body measurements. Step 5. Add the numbers if any. Step 6. See the construction video of the pattern that you have selected. Step 7. Construct the pattern in your notebook with the help of a triangular scale. With that, we've come to the end of the session.